The moment my daughter's fiancé announced he would control my spending, I smiled. While he counted pennies, I leveraged my global empire to engineer his complete, targeted financial ruin. Before continuing, write where you are from or what time it is. From now on, my fiancé will control your spending. The words were a dull impact, not a surprise, but a formal declaration of war. My daughter, Elara, sat across my mahogany desk in the study, her posture too stiff, her voice brittle with the confidence she had borrowed entirely from the man beside her. She thought she was seizing my purse strings, finally putting the matriarch of Hayes Logistics on an allowance. The foolish children had no idea I was about to seize their entire world. The air in my study, usually chilled to a precise 68-degree ref, felt suddenly warmer, sticky with their manufactured ambition. Elara worried the 3-carat diamond on her finger, a flawless stone I had funneled through 3 shell companies so Reese could maintain the pathetic fiction that he'd bought it himself. Reese Sterling sat next to her, tailored within an inch of his life, his suit a shade too tight across the shoulders, a uniform for a man who aspired, but hadn't yet arrived. He looked at me and smiled, a practiced, predatory flash of teeth. I let the silence settle, allowing the sheer weight of my 70-year legacy to press down on them. People rush to fill silence, and in their haste, they reveal everything. Reese, sensing Elara's nerve falter, stepped in with the condescending ease of a junior analyst. "Vivienne," he started, using my first name, a calculated impertinence. "Elara and I have been reviewing the quarterly disbursements. We've identified expenditures that are frankly unsustainable for a woman in your position." He held up a glowing tablet, a cheap piece of consumer tech that looked ridiculous against the vast, uncluttered expanse of my 19th century desk. My entire life, reduced to a series of spreadsheets, formatted from a template he downloaded online. He was lecturing me, Vivian Hayes, on financial prudence. I, who had built a global empire out of a single inherited warehouse, understood that true power was not just in balance sheets, but in the culture you curated, the history you controlled. For example, he continued, tapping the screen, the monthly upkeep for the botanical gardens at the estate, the donations to the opera, the retainer for the personal historian who archives the family's records. These are sentimental costs, not investments. They yield no tangible return. His audacity was breathtaking. I felt my hand twitch, but my expression remained placid. Patience, I told myself. Let him lay out his entire pathetic strategy. Finally, Elara took her cue. She avoided my gaze, looking at a point just over my left shoulder. "From now on," she repeated, her voice hardening, "Reese will control your spending. It's what's best for the family's long-term financial health." A declaration of coup, wrapped in the language of fiscal responsibility. They saw an aging lioness, ready to be pensioned off. I waited another long, profound beat. Elara's shoulders tightened. Even Reese's triumphant smile started to look stretched, brittle. Then I smiled. It was a serene, untroubled expression, the smile of a grandmaster who has already calculated the game out to its crushing conclusion. "Very well," I said, my voice a soft purr. "If you believe this is what's best for the family, I will, of course, defer to your judgment. Send me the necessary forms, Reese. I look forward to a more optimized future." The relief that washed over them was comical. Elara's tension visibly drained. Reese's grin became genuine, victorious. They had done it. They had conquered me. They truly believed they had won. But before they could speak, Elara looked at me, a flicker of raw uncertainty in her eyes. "Mother, aren't you angry?" she asked, the fear finally cutting through her rehearsed script. "Angry?" I echoed, lifting one hand to adjust a tiny, almost imperceptible fold in my silk scarf. The movement was slow, deliberate. "No, darling. I'm simply evaluating. You see, I spent a lifetime building systems so robust that they can withstand any variable. You have just declared yourselves a variable, Reese." I picked up a pen, a simple instrument, and tapped it softly on the desk. "I am not angry. I am interested to see how you perform under the terms of the contract you've just established." The implication hung there. They hadn't imposed a contract on me. They had just volunteered for one I would write. Reese's confident posture momentarily broke. He saw the shift, the hidden meaning in my placidity, but quickly dismissed it. He was too intoxicated by his perceived victory to register the danger. They had walked into my fortress, announced my surrender, and left with the distinct, sweet taste of success on their tongues. They thought they had seized my purse strings, but the only thing they had seized was the wire I'd already attached to his entire life. The first week of the new regime was a performance of meticulous compliance on my part. I played the role of the chastened, slightly befuddled retiree, an industrial titan now grappling with the baffling complexities of a household budget. It was a new strategic challenge, and I found the deception highly enjoyable. Deception, after all, is merely the art of managing the perceptions of others. On Monday, Reese received his first requisition from my personal assistant, the renewal of a subscription to a quarterly journal on ancient Roman pottery. The cost was a trivial $200. An email arrived an hour later, addressed to my assistant, but clearly intended for my eyes. "Please have Mrs. Hayes provide a one-page summary justifying this expense and its relevance to the family's core financial objectives." The man was trying to drown me in bureaucracy, mistaking process for power. I instructed my assistant to thank him for his diligence and to cancel the subscription. Then I made a single private call to a dealer in London. I used a discretionary account Reese didn't know existed and purchased a newly discovered second-century Roman vase. The price was $200,000. Reese counted my pennies. I acquired objects that held their value for centuries. Wednesday brought a request for my annual donation to a scholarship fund for underprivileged music students, a sum I donated every year for 2 decades. Reese's response was a masterpiece of condescending corporate jargon. While philanthropic optics are important, I believe we should pivot our charitable strategy towards more synergistic opportunities. I'm tabling this for now, pending a full review. He wasn't just controlling my spending. He was trying to steal my legacy of philanthropy and rebrand it as his own. The head of the music school called me, worried. I assured him the school would not suffer. That afternoon, I tripled my donation, again using funds that were a phantom in his limited system. Reese saw none of this. He saw only the small, predictable reports crossing his desk. He saw my quiet compliance, my canceled subscriptions, my tabled donations, and he mistook these things for total victory. He would sit at the head of my dinner table, pontificating about fiscal discipline, his voice booming slightly too loud in the formal dining hall. "The trick, Elara," he'd pronounce, carving the roast, "is not to save, but to optimize. Efficiency is the new wealth." Elara looked on with a kind of proud, liberated relief. "He's brilliant, isn't he, Mother?" she asked me one evening. Reese was in the hall, arguing loudly with a credit card company about a late fee on one of my accounts that his own oversight had caused. He's not afraid to make the tough decisions. He was very decisive, I agreed, my voice a model of maternal deference. I did not mention that the decisions he was making were microscopic adjustments to a massive machine whose true workings he couldn't begin to comprehend. He was a child given a toy steering wheel, convinced he was piloting the vessel. Their happiness was almost painful to watch, the bliss of the profoundly ignorant. Elara planned their wedding with a fervor she'd never shown before, dutifully submitting every expense projection to Reese. Reese, in turn, swelled with self-importance, his old nervous energy replaced by a heavy, manufactured calm. He had stopped trying on my life like a costume. He believed it was a perfect fit. I even praised his astute decision to switch the household to a cheaper brand of bottled water, a detail he included in his weekly financial summary to me. The cost savings were perhaps $100 a month. But while he was busy counting my cents, I was busy executing a corporate intelligence operation that would have humbled a small nation. The moment the drawing room door closed behind me, the work began. The gears of my empire were turning, not to manage household expenses, but to target the precise weakness in Reese's overstretched, fraudulent world. I needed to move fast. A critical shareholder meeting for Hayes Logistics was scheduled in 18 days, and I needed Reese off the board by then to secure my full control. He was driving a toy car, but I was about to give him the keys to a tank I had sabotaged. The charade ended the moment the door to my real office closed. This room, unlike the elegant, book-lined study upstairs, was a masterpiece of cold, brutalist efficiency. It was located in the sub-basement of the estate, encased in a foot of steel-reinforced concrete, shielded against every form of electronic surveillance. It was my command bunker, the silent nexus of my global power. I sat in the command chair, the leather cool against my skin. The mask of the frail, compliant matriarch fell away. The problem was Reese Sterling. The objective was his total, unconditional subjugation. I didn't hire a common private investigator. I engaged the services of a firm known only as the Vespers. They were not a company. They were a legend, whispered in the dark corners of corporate espionage. Digital archaeologists who could excavate a person's life down to the bedrock of their most deeply buried secrets. My instructions, delivered via a multi-encrypted, single-use channel, were simple. The target is Reese Sterling. I want a complete forensic life audit. I want documented proof of every lie, every hidden debt, and every compromised relationship. The budget is unlimited. The timeline is immediate. Discretion is paramount. I followed the message with a 7-figure wire transfer for the retainer. 60 seconds later, the single word "acknowledged" flashed on the screen. A silent, invisible army of hackers and social engineers was instantly mobilized across the globe. 2 weeks later, the first report from the Vespers arrived. A multi-gigabyte encrypted dossier. I spent an entire night dissecting the life of Reese Sterling. What I found was not a monster, but a fraud. A man whose entire existence was a meticulously constructed house of cards. The first card was his past. His official biography, the one he fed to Elara and his firm, was of a brilliant, self-made man. The Vespers report painted a different picture. They had found his sealed juvenile records, a charge for plagiarism, an accusation of cheating on his college entrance exams that had resulted in a quiet, unrecorded suspension. The genius was not in his intellect, but in his early mastery of manipulating systems. His academic record was a masterful embellishment. He claimed to have graduated summa cum laude. The official transcript, procured somehow by the Vespers, showed a respectable but far from brilliant 3.2 GPA. The prestigious internship at a top-tier London investment bank? It never happened. The Vespers provided a copy of his employment record from a suburban bank branch where he'd worked as a junior teller. His professional life was built on the same rotten foundation. His rapid rise at his current firm was due to his skill at appropriating the successes of others. He didn't steal ideas. He stole credit. a far more insidious and harder to prove form of theft. The most damning revelations were financial. Reese projected an image of stability. The reality was a portrait of a desperate gambler. The Vespers had unspooled his entire network of personal finances, including a series of shell corporations registered in the Cayman Islands. He wasn't building wealth. He was juggling debt. He was using undeclared leverage to make incredibly high-risk speculative trades in the volatile world of commodity futures. A single significant market downturn in the wrong sector would wipe him out completely, exposing him as a reckless amateur. I leaned back, bathed in the cool glow of the monitors. It was a complete, systematic map of my enemy's weaknesses. Every lie, every debt, every embellishment was a pressure point. He had not fallen in love with my daughter. He had targeted her. He saw the Hayes name not as a family, but as the ultimate bailout, the unassailable safety net for his lifetime of risk and fraud. He wanted to control my spending to gain access to my limitless capital. A cold, clean anger settled in my gut. He had attempted to compromise my empire. Meanwhile, upstairs, Reese was still busy. He sent my assistant a new template for all future expense reports, a multi-page document he called the protocol. He was tightening the noose on my trivial household spending, blissfully unaware that I was holding the schematics of his imminent professional destruction. I tasked my top data science team. Find the exact intersection between his financial world and my physical one. Find the one place where a subtle nudge from my world could trigger a catastrophic collapse in his. They found it. He was heavily invested in coffee bean futures, betting the house on a stable harvest. My proprietary logistics data, however, showed a quiet, little-reported fungal outbreak in a key growing region in South America. He had gambled his life, but he didn't realize I was the one controlling the deck, the dealer, and the table. With the Vespers dossier providing the full systemic map of Reese's fraudulent life, the next phase was strategic positioning. I needed to inflate his ego, to elevate him to a height from which his inevitable fall would be spectacular and irreversible. The setting for this gambit was the hushed, wood-paneled dining room of the Olympian Club, a private establishment where fortunes were made and unmade over $100 salads and $1,000 bottles of wine. It was the natural habitat of the men who ran Reese's world. My guests were the two senior managing partners of Reese's investment firm, a pair of silver-haired sharks named Blackwood and Miles. They accepted my invitation instantly. When Vivian Hayes invites you to lunch, it is a summons, not a social inquiry. I let the conversation drift, discussing the market in broad philosophical terms, allowing them to feel at ease. Only when the coffee was poured did I pivot to the true purpose. "Arthur, Jonathan," I began, my voice a confidential murmur. "I find myself in a transitional phase. As you know, I'm stepping back from the day-to-day operations of Hayes Logistics. I'm focusing on legacy, on ensuring the long-term stability of my family's capital." I watched the flicker of intense interest in their eyes. They smelled money. The Hayes Pension Fund was a multi-billion-dollar prize, the holy grail that could secure their firm's dominance for a generation. "My current fund managers are competent," I continued with a dismissive wave of my hand, "but they lack a certain innovative spark. I'm considering making a change." The air thickened instantly. "We would, of course, be honored to be considered, Vivienne," Blackwood said, his voice a low, hungry growl. "I'm sure you would," I replied, allowing a small, knowing smile. "But I'm not looking for a firm. I'm looking for an individual, someone with vision, with daring, someone I can trust implicitly with my family's future." I let the glittering lure hang in the air. I watched as the same thought, the same name, dawned on both of their faces. "It's a funny coincidence," I said, feigning an accidental thought. "But my daughter's fiancé, Reese Sterling, works for you, doesn't he? A truly remarkable young man." The trap was sprung. "Yes, Reese is one of our rising stars," Miles chimed in, his voice suddenly thick with proprietary pride. "Rising star is an understatement," I said, shaking my head in feigned admiration. "His grasp of the market, his forward-thinking strategies. He has been advising me informally on my personal finances. His insights are astonishing, a level of sophistication one rarely sees in a man his age." They now saw Reese not as an employee, but as their personal key to the Hayes vault. He was their golden goose, and they would protect him and promote him because they believed he was their future. "We have very high hopes for Reese," Blackwood said, the sincerity in his voice entirely manufactured, but utterly real to him. "As you should," I replied, gathering my purse. "I will be in touch. I have much to consider, but the quality of the advisor will be the single most important factor in my decision." I left them there, their minds reeling. I had constructed the pedestal. I had convinced the world of Reese's genius. All that remained was to give him the taste of real power that would make him climb onto it himself. Back at my command bunker, I received a secure message from my data science team. They confirmed the convergence. The small fungal blight in South America, combined with my quiet adjustments to the global shipping fleet, guaranteed a sharp drop in coffee futures within 10 days. The next day, Reese, high on his promotion, a corner office, and an impressive new title, arrogantly demanded his current junior analyst, a sharp young man named Marco, be moved to a remote, meaningless project. Reese saw Marco as a threat. I intercepted the internal memo. I made sure Marco was transferred not to a meaningless project, but to an internal risk assessment team, making him indebted to me, an unwitting asset for the coming collapse. I had just convinced the world of his genius, but all I needed was one tiny, invisible action to prove their mistake. The corporate gambit had convinced the world Reese was indispensable. Now I needed to close the circle, to bind him personally to my plan with a chain forged from his own ambition and Elara's deepest desires. The perfect trap is one the victim begs to enter. I summoned Elara to the estate's botanical gardens, the vast multi-acre glass conservatory I had built for her 10th birthday. The air inside the orchid house was thick with the sweet, heavy scent of blooming phalaenopsis, a profound sensory anchor for her. She arrived, her demeanor cautious, expecting another power play. I met her not with steel, but with a soft maternal warmth I hadn't used in years. "Elara," I began, my voice low, vulnerable. "I have been doing a great deal of thinking since our conversation, and I have come to realize that you were right. I have been so focused on building this empire, on securing our future, that I have forgotten how to simply be your mother." I saw the hard, defiant lines of her face begin to soften. It was a masterful performance of vulnerability. "I cannot change who I am overnight," I said with a sigh of faint, calculated regret. "But I can try to make amends. I know you feel adrift without a purpose of your own." I led her to a secluded bench. "I have decided to establish a new charitable foundation. I will call it the Elara Hayes Foundation for the Arts." Her eyes widened, shining instantly. This was her dream, a chance to make a real difference, to have a purpose entirely separate from the cold corporate world. Its mission will be to provide scholarships and funding for arts education in underserved communities. You, Elara, will be its chairwoman, not in a symbolic role, but as its absolute leader. You will build it from the ground up. It will be your legacy, not mine. Tears welled in her eyes. It was the ultimate gift, the ultimate validation. "Mother," she whispered, choked with emotion, I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," I said, placing a gentle hand over hers. "Just accept it. But there is one condition." Her face tensed slightly, waiting for the inevitable catch. "This foundation will be a significant financial entity," I said, my tone shifting to serious practicality. "I will provide an initial endowment of $50 million. An endowment of that size requires expert, trustworthy management." I paused, letting her connect the dots. "To build trust between us, Elara, to prove that I am ready to let go. The foundation's endowment will be managed exclusively by Reese. It will be his responsibility to grow it, to protect it. Your vision and his financial acumen. Together, you will build something wonderful." The final lock clicked into place. I had offered her her dream and made Reese the key. To refuse would be to admit she didn't trust him. To accept was to hand me a powerful new lever of control. The tears now flowed freely, tears of joy, relief, and reconciliation. "Thank you, Mother. Thank you." She threw her arms around me. I held her, my expression serene, my mind cold as ice. She saw love. I saw acquisition. The foundation was not a gift. It was a gilded cage, and I had just watched her and the man she loved walk into it, hand in hand. Reese, blinded by the glittering resume line, signed the management contract I drafted without reading the fine print. A short, dense clause granting the funding party, me, full oversight and veto power over any highly leveraged commodity trading risks associated with the manager's personal portfolio, citing reputational risk. He signed it, never imagining his private accounts would be monitored. He became instantly reckless. Bolstered by the title, and desperate to turn his $8.4 million in debt into a molehill before managing the $50 million endowment, he poured every last dollar of his newly secured credit lines into the same high-risk coffee bean futures. He was convinced his analysis was infallible. He walked into the gilded cage thinking he was the lion, unaware I had already chained his shadow to the floor. The time for observation was over. Reese had been elevated, his ego inflated, his financial position leveraged to the breaking point. The house of cards was built as high as it could possibly go. Now it was time for a gentle, almost imperceptible breeze. My command bunker was the quietest place on Earth. Yet at that moment, it was the epicenter of a storm that was about to break across the global commodities market. On the central monitor, two sets of data were displayed side by side. On the left, the public pricing from the New York Mercantile Exchange showed the stable price of coffee bean futures. On the right, my data, the proprietary real-time information streaming from the heart of the Hayes Logistics empire. My data told a different story. It was a mosaic of 1,000 small, seemingly unrelated facts that, when pieced together, painted a picture of imminent collapse. A satellite image showed the subtle, telltale discoloration of a fungal blight spreading across a key plantation in Colombia. A shipping manifest from the port of Santos in Brazil showed a sudden, unexplained 20% drop in outgoing coffee shipments. An internal memo reported chatter of a potential dock workers' strike in Hamburg, a key entry point for coffee into the European market. To the outside world, this was background noise. To me, it was a clear, unmistakable signal. The coffee market, which Reese had bet his entire fraudulent existence on, was a bubble, and I was holding the pin. I did not need to do anything as crude as dumping stock. Such moves are noisy, traceable. My power comes from a superior understanding of the system's architecture. I control the arteries of global trade. A small, temporary constriction in one of those arteries is all that is required. With a few keystrokes, I brought up the global allocation map for our refrigerated shipping containers, the lifeblood of perishable commodities. I identified a fleet of 20 ships scheduled to transport Brazilian coffee beans to North America and Europe over the next 3 weeks. Then I began to issue a series of quiet internal directives. A ship bound for New York was rerouted to Asia, citing a minor mechanical issue that would require a week of repairs. A batch of containers in Santos was flagged for a random customs inspection, a bureaucratic maneuver that would tie them up in port for a critical 10-day period. I approved a sudden generous pay bonus for our logistics coordinators in Hamburg, a move I knew would accelerate their ongoing labor negotiations and increase the probability of a short-term tactical strike. Each action was small, discreet, and perfectly justifiable from a business perspective. They were tiny butterfly wing flaps in the vast, complex ecosystem of global trade. But I knew that these small flaps, when combined, would create a hurricane. The delayed shipments, the tied-up containers, the labor dispute, they would create a perceived shortage in the market, and panic would begin to set in among mid-level traders. That slide would trigger the margin calls. This was a targeted, precision-guided munition aimed at a single portfolio, Reese Sterling's. To the outside world, it would look like a natural market correction, a regrettable but unavoidable turn of events. No one would ever trace it back to a series of quiet commands issued from a sub-base in a private estate. I leaned back in my chair, my work done. I did not move for 3 days. I simply waited. The first tremor hit on a Tuesday morning. It began not as a crash, but as a flicker, a nervous tick on the screen of the commodities exchange. The price of coffee futures dipped by a few cents. To most, it was nothing. To a man as heavily leveraged as Reese, it was the first sign of a crack in the foundation of his world. I watched the unfolding chaos through the discreet, real-time reports from the Vespers, who had compromised Reese's work and personal devices. I saw the frantic flurry of messages he exchanged with his offshore broker, who still clung to denial. Just market jitters. Hold your position. By Wednesday, the jitters had become a violent seizure. The news wires were buzzing with rumors: a fungal outbreak in Colombia, a shipping slowdown in Brazil, a potential labor dispute in Hamburg. My carefully planted seeds of chaos were sprouting, and the market was reacting with predictable panic. The price of coffee futures began to slide, then tumble, then plummet. Reese's screen became a waterfall of red negative numbers. I saw the internal firm reports detailing his increasingly panicked, pale, and sweaty demeanor. He tried desperately to secure a short-term emergency loan from a corporate bank using the foundation as collateral. I had foreseen this. The bank manager, citing the reputational risk clause I had quietly slipped into the foundation's management contract, refused the loan, saying any high-risk personal leverage would compromise the endowment. Reese, in his rush to sign, had unknowingly blocked his own last emergency exit. He was trapped. He was about to learn that when you bet the house, you should make sure the house doesn't belong to the dealer. The margin call came on Thursday at 10:17 a.m. It is a polite, clinical term for a financial death sentence. It was a demand from his broker: deposit more funds to cover the mounting losses. If he couldn't, the broker would forcibly liquidate his assets at a catastrophic loss to cover the debt. Reese received the notification via a stark automated email. He needed to deposit $7 million into his account within 24 hours. $7 million that he did not have. He had leveraged everything. He had no reserves, no safety net. He was standing on a financial cliff edge, and the ground had just given way beneath his feet. The Vespers report gave me a second-by-second account of his implosion. I saw his desperate, failed attempts to secure a short-term loan. I saw the panicked liquidation of his meager, legitimate stock portfolio, which yielded only a fraction of what he needed. I saw the series of unanswered, increasingly hysterical calls he made to his wealthy friends, who, sensing the stench of failure, suddenly became unavailable. His professional world began to collapse simultaneously. His senior partners, Blackwood and Miles, who had been treating him like a king just days before, now looked at him with cold, reptilian eyes. They were not concerned for him. They were concerned for their firm's exposure and the Hayes pension fund. He was no longer an asset. He was a contagion. An emergency high-level meeting was called. I received a full audio recording from a listening device the Vespers had planted in the boardroom. Blackwood and Miles tore into Reese, accusing him of reckless endangerment of the firm's reputation. They placed him on immediate indefinite leave and launched a full internal investigation. I knew the investigation would be the final nail in his coffin. It would inevitably unspool his entire history of lies, his falsified resume, and his stolen credit. By Friday morning, Reese Sterling was a ruined man. He had lost his fortune, his career, his reputation, and his future. He was facing professional annihilation, public disgrace, and the very real possibility of legal action from his firm. He left his office in a daze, carrying his belongings in a cardboard box, a corporate cliché of total and absolute defeat. He had nowhere to go, no one to turn to, except through Elara, back to me. The broken, defeated pawn was about to be returned to the Grandmaster's hand. The call was not made to Reese. He would have been too proud, too broken to answer a call from my number. My assistant placed the call to Elara's personal cell phone. Mrs. Vivian Hayes requests your presence and the presence of Mr. Sterling in her study at the estate this evening at 6:00. It was a summons. Reese, who had been silent for a full day, finally spoke. His voice was a dead, lifeless rasp. No. No. Maybe she can help, Reese. She can fix this, Elara pleaded. No one can, he said, the words full of profound despair. But Elara, her fear making her strong, insisted, we have to go. I'm not going to just sit here in the dark while our lives fall apart. They arrived at precisely 6:00. They were escorted by my head of security to the study. The same study where just weeks earlier they had so confidently announced the terms of their new regime. The atmosphere was profoundly different. The chair where Reese had sat was empty. The armchair where Elara had sat was now occupied by Mr. Kincaid, the chief counsel of the Vespers. Elara and Reese were not offered a seat. They were made to stand before my desk like prisoners before a judge. The pretense of a family discussion had been stripped away. This was a sentencing. Reese did not look at me. He stared at the polished mahogany surface of my desk, his shoulders slumped in utter defeat. He knew, on a deep primal level, that he was standing in the presence of the architect of his own ruin. I let the silence stretch, allowing it to become a physical weight. Finally, I spoke. My voice was the calm, measured tone of a scientist presenting a set of irrefutable findings. Thank you for coming, I began, my gaze fixed on Reese. I believe there are some matters that require clarification. Mr. Kincaid is the head of a research firm I employ. They have been compiling a report on your professional and personal history, Reese. For due diligence purposes, of course. Reese's head jerked up. A flicker of panic entered his dead eyes. Mr. Kincaid, please begin with the academic summary, I instructed. The lawyer opened his leather portfolio. His voice was a dry, precise monotone, the voice of a man reading an obituary. Reese Sterling, graduated with an official GPA of 3.2. This is contrary to the 3.9 summa cum laude distinction listed on the curriculum vitae submitted to his current employer. Furthermore, we have a sworn affidavit confirming that Mr. Sterling never participated in the London School of Economics summer internship program. Elara gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. She pleaded for a denial with her eyes. Reese offered none. Professionally, Mr. Kincaid droned on, our research indicates a pattern of intellectual property appropriation. We have statements from 2 former colleagues detailing how Mr. Sterling repeatedly took credit for their analytical work, leading to his promotion in 2021. Financially, Mr. Kincaid continued, turning a page. Mr. Sterling maintains 3 undeclared offshore entities in the Cayman Islands, through which he has been conducting a series of highly leveraged, unauthorized trades in commodity futures. As of this morning, these accounts carry a negative balance of approximately $8.4 million. This constitutes a catastrophic personal bankruptcy and a significant violation of his firm's compliance and ethics policies. That's enough, Mr. Kincaid, I said softly. The lawyer closed the portfolio with a soft final snap. Elara was openly weeping. Reese, she whispered, is this true? He finally looked at her, a mask of shame and despair. He gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. It was then that I delivered the master stroke. You see, your personal financial implosion was not just a matter of bad luck, Reese, I said, my voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. I slid a document across the desk toward him. It was a single page, a printout of my proprietary shipping data from 3 weeks prior, showing the first signs of the coming coffee market collapse. He stared at it, his eyes slowly widening in horror. This was data no one in his world could have possessed. The market did not correct itself, I explained, my voice as gentle as a surgeon's scalpel. I corrected it. Your ruin was not an accident. It was a business decision. I analyzed your vulnerabilities, and I executed a targeted strategic strike. I built your pedestal, and then I kicked it out from under you. The final horrifying truth dawned on his face. He had not been a player in a game against the market. He had been a pawn in a game against me, a game he had never even known he was playing. He looked at me then, and the only thing left in his eyes was the pure, unadulterated fear of the captive. The truth, in its full, brutal totality, settled over the room, sucking the very air from it. Elara's quiet sobs were the only sound. Reese stood utterly exposed, a man whose past, present, and future had been systematically dismantled before his eyes. He was a king in checkmate, his board cleared of every piece but his own. It was time to offer him the terms of his surrender. You have 2 paths before you, Reese, I said, my voice calm and conversational, as if discussing a simple business proposal. Path A is the one you are currently on. Your firm's internal investigation will conclude within the week. They will uncover everything Mr. Kincaid has just outlined and more. You will be fired, of course. Then you will be sued for breach of contract and gross negligence. The SEC will launch its own investigation into your unauthorized trading. You will be facing public disgrace, financial ruin, and, given the scale of your fraud, a not insignificant prison sentence. Elara, of course, will leave you. Your life as you know it will be over. I let that sink in, a chillingly precise and accurate prediction of his fate. Then, I continued, a magnanimous tone creeping into my voice. There is path B, my path. I leaned forward, my hands clasped on the desk. On path B, none of that happens. Tomorrow morning, your firm's investigation will be quietly terminated due to a lack of evidence. The senior partners will be informed that your recent losses were the result of an unforeseeable and blameless market anomaly. All of your personal debts, all 8.4 million of them, will be absorbed by a private trust I control. Your name will be cleared. Your reputation will be restored. You will be saved from ruin and from prison. You will be given a clean slate. Reese looked up, a desperate drowning man seeing a lifeline. But he knew, as I did, that the lifeline was a leash. "And what do you want in return?" he whispered, his voice thin. "Everything," I replied, my voice a soft silken purr. "In return, you will belong to me. You will resign from your current firm, effective immediately. You will accept a new position as the head of a new internal finance division at Hayes Logistics, a division I am creating specifically for you. Your salary will be generous, but your trades, your investments, your every financial decision will be made with my direct approval. You will become my asset, my wholly owned subsidiary." I turned my gaze to my weeping daughter. "You will, of course, still marry Elara. The wedding will proceed as planned. It will be the society event of the season. You will live in the home I choose for you. You will take the vacations I approve. You will present a perfect, happy, successful image to the world. An image that I will own, that I will curate, that I will control." The full horrifying scope of my proposal became clear. I was not just offering him a job. I was offering him a new identity, a new life, one in which he would be a gilded prisoner, a puppet whose every string I held. I was saving him from one prison only to place him in another, more comfortable, but infinitely more inescapable one. "This is insane," Elara choked out, looking at me with a mixture of horror and betrayal. "You can't do this. This isn't a business deal. This is our life." "On the contrary, my dear," I said, my voice losing its gentle tone and hardening into steel. "This is the ultimate business deal. I am making a significant investment to acquire a distressed asset, Reese, and to protect my primary asset, you. I am simply dictating the terms of the merger, and my terms are non-negotiable." I stood up, signaling the end of the audience. "You have until morning to decide, but the choice really is no choice at all. Path A is annihilation. Path B is survival. Your survival, Reese, is now entirely in my hands." His shoulders were slumped. The fight was gone. He was facing a choice between complete destruction and a life of luxurious servitude. It was no choice at all. He would take my deal. The transition would be swift and silent, and I had already begun choosing the silverware for their magnificent, gilded prison. Reese, as expected, accepted the terms. The choice between annihilation and a gilded cage is, for a man like him, no choice at all. The instinct for self-preservation, sweetened with the promise of continued luxury, is an overwhelming force. The transition was executed with the swift, silent efficiency of a corporate merger. The day after our meeting, Reese tendered his resignation. The internal investigation at his firm was quietly and inexplicably dropped. A week later, a press release announced the creation of the new Hayes Global Strategies Division, with the brilliant young financier, Reese Sterling, appointed as its inaugural president. His debts vanished, absorbed into the labyrinthine depths of my private trusts. His past was erased, his future rewritten according to my design. The wedding 3 months later was the spectacle I had ordained. It was held in the gardens of the estate, a breathtaking affair with a guest list that read like a global power index. Elara was a vision in a custom-made gown, her beauty a tragic, fragile mask. She moved through the day like a ghost, her smile never quite reaching her eyes. She was playing her part, the happy, blushing bride. But the joy she had felt just months earlier, the belief that she was finally escaping my control, had curdled into a permanent low-grade despair. She understood now that her bid for freedom had not just failed, It had resulted in the permanent enslavement of both herself and the man she had believed was her liberator. Reese, for his part, was a flawless groom. He was charming, attentive, and eloquent. He delivered a moving toast to his beautiful bride and his visionary mother-in-law, but I, who owned him, could see the hollowness behind his performance. The confident, predatory spark in his eyes was gone, replaced by the watchful, cautious gaze of a man who was constantly being monitored. He was a king in a play, granted all the trappings of power, the title, the respect, the wealth, but with no real agency of his own. Their life together became a curated performance of happiness. I purchased a magnificent townhouse for them in the city, renovated to my exact specifications. I chose the art for their walls, the furniture for their rooms, the staff for their kitchen. I approved their vacation destinations, a quiet, respectable trip to the south of France, not the flashy, vulgar Dubai trip they had once dreamed of. I managed their social calendar, ensuring they were seen at the right galas, seated at the right tables, photographed with the right people. I did not rule them with overt commands. My control was more subtle, more insidious. It was a system of gentle suggestions, of quiet approvals, of unspoken expectations. I had created a perfect frictionless world for them, a paradise of effortless luxury. But it was a paradise whose walls were invisible but absolute. They had everything they could ever want except the one thing they had tried to take from me: control over their own lives. The love they had once shared, the passionate alliance against the tyrannical mother, was poisoned. It was now a complex relationship of resentment, dependency, and shared captivity. Elara looked at Reese and saw not her hero, but the man whose weakness had cost them their freedom. Reese looked at Elara and saw not the woman he loved, but the beautiful, unwitting bait that had led him into the most elegant and inescapable trap he could have ever imagined. They were beautiful, successful, and admired. They were also my prisoners. They lived in a magnificent gilded cage, and they knew with a certainty that would haunt their every waking moment that I, and I alone, held the key. They had tried to control my spending. I now controlled their very existence. A year passed. Reese, under my direct and constant supervision, proved to be an effective, if uninspired, executive. Stripped of his ability to engage in reckless gambling, his natural intelligence and ambition were channeled into the more predictable, profitable channels I laid out for him. The Hayes Global Strategies Division posted impressive, stable returns. He was a model employee, praised in the financial press for his meteoric, disciplined rise. He followed my orders without question, and he never, ever took an unauthorized risk. Elara, in turn, became the perfect society wife. She ran the charitable foundation with a quiet, sad dignity, its work a constant, painful reminder of the peace offering that had sealed their fate. The fiery, rebellious spark that had once defined her was gone, replaced by a cool, placid resignation. Their marriage, once a passionate rebellion, was now a quiet, functional business partnership. They were allies in their shared captivity, bound together not by love, but by a mutual understanding of their predicament. But the laughter, the intimacy, the spark of genuine connection, those had been casualties of my war. One evening, I was in my command bunker conducting my annual review of my personal financial holdings. I was reconciling my assets, categorizing my investments, and assessing my overall net worth. I moved through the balance sheets, my fingers flying across the holographic keyboard. I categorized my real estate holdings, my equity portfolio, my collection of fine art, my private trusts. Then I came to the final section of my personal ledger. It was a category I had created myself, one that did not exist on any standard accounting software. It was labeled simply Assets, Intangible, and Proprietary. Under this heading, I had listed the things whose value could not be measured in mere dollars, but in the currency of power and control. I made a new entry. My fingers typed the words, the letters appearing in crisp white text on the screen. It was the final logical step in the process that had begun with their foolish declaration of war. Under the heading Assets, Intangible, and Proprietary, I typed Reese and Elara Sterling. I paused, looking at their names now officially logged, categorized, and filed within the vast, complex architecture of my personal holdings. They were no longer just my daughter and my son-in-law. They were a line item, a subsidiary, a successfully acquired and fully integrated asset, performing exactly as designed. I saved the file. The system was balanced. The books were closed. The acquisition was complete. I had achieved total control, but the laughter had been lost forever. If this story resonated with you, leave a like and consider subscribing. You can also drop any comment below, even just one word. Maybe tell me where you're watching from, or what time it is right now. Sometimes one word is enough to say you were here.